Welcome the next speaker, Mrs. Petra Zdražilová, from the Office of the Public Ombudsman. And as you can imagine, we're going to talk about legal aspects. What impact does the legal environment have on the performance of social work? That's the topic of her contribution. She's been working on the agenda of social and legal protection of children, people with disabilities, protection of people from mistreatment, people in imprisonment, and foster care. She also teaches at Higher Vocational School Caritas. The floor is yours. So thank you very much for introducing me. I would just like to say that my name is Zdražilová, not Zdražilová. As you said, my contribution is called the impact of legislation on performance of social work. A few seconds ago, I still don't know whether I'm just going to speak about this or improvise a bit more, which might be quite becoming as I'm in a session of called creativity, and maybe add some of my ideas that might not be related, but might be related to pandemics. The risks of what I'm going to do is that it's going to be embarrassing, but on the other hand, before such auditorium, once I embarrass myself in front of such auditorium, it's going to make all my future embarrassments quite negligible. If I wanted to present at the conference in few years that we're going to see each other face to face, hopefully you will all have forgotten. The positive is that I can't hear you and see you, so and this silence that I can hear, it doesn't mean that it's the embarrassing silence. Hopefully, if you offer me some help, I believe that you mean it sincerely. I would like to divide it into 4 parts: leaving my comfort zone, dignity and human rights, that's already been mentioned, it's bravery, and it's self-care. Care about oneself's mental state. So leaving the comfort zone. We already heard that last year has been for all of us the year of change, year when we were learning new things, we were re-evaluating our priorities, values, and very often we had to leave our comfort zone. I knew that if I didn't leave my comfort zone, I would be upset with myself in the future. And I think that these are the moments when we should leave our comfort zones, because that's how we increase our competencies, our potential, which is very important for us to be able to perform our work as best as we can do. We also heard that I work in the Ombudsman's office, but I don't want to speak as such person, but somebody who lives with social work and who's been living with social work for 15 years, or it's been part of my life for 15 years, and that's why, because I might have some cynical, ironic and sarcastic comments. I'm not going to say some kind of stupid jokes or stereotypes about ethnic groups or LGBT communities, because I personally think as somebody who works in an institution who's there to protect the rights of these people, as well as somebody who is very close to social work values, so I don't find these jokes appropriate. So part of my contemplations is going to be about bravery. When I had the opportunity to work with Mr. Ottokar Motail, he used to teach me how to discuss, to argue with him, to make fun out of certain things, to be able to give each other negative feedback. And the time has proven that this ability is not always welcome. And it also shown that I personally have an issue to discuss with people that don't share similar values, that perhaps don't even do their work well. But with people that I value and that I like, I have no issue arguing. I also realize that social workers need to talk about difficult things with people who they don't cannot relate to, and that these, for example, they have to deal with people suffering from social exclusion, homeless people, ethnic minorities. So you as social workers are facing that you need to defend the rights of such vulnerable groups, and you have to defend it to people from different political views. So you have to defend them towards people that you don't relate to, that you would not like to in your private life meet. Then you have to deal with people who are professional, but who have a professional job, but they suffer from certain cognitive bias. So in effect, they don't actually perform their work as well as they think. On the other hand, there are people who are very professional and don't boast about it so much. So this is about my issue of advocating somebody's rights with these complicated people. And if you figured out a way how, then I would like to hear your recipe. So this kind of complaining of mine, there are things that maybe we're not prepared to talk about, or we don't see a solution in a foreseeable future, and we cannot contribute to this. So it's kind of my defense from frustration to make fun out of things, be a little bit cynical, satirical. So I'm not doing it because of you, I'm doing it for myself, which is another thing that we should all learn, because I'm talking to social workers, and I know many of you. And I know that if we are to do something for ourselves, we very often think that it's not that all that important, that it can wait, there are more important things to do now. But if we're supposed to do something for somebody else, or we ask for help, you're able to do miracles or bend backwards to help others. So I would like to say that it is also important to take care of yourself and do things that are important for you. So now I'm going to continue with my contribution that I chose as a result of my stepping out of my comfort zone, and I started teaching students of higher vocational school of social work, and I had to contemplate about what part of the law is important for these students. How am I supposed to teach them the whole criminal law within just a few lessons, a law that I spent several terms studying, and that also textbook for lawyers, it's too dense for them, too intense. But again, a law book for secondary school is not enough for them, and it made me think about what part of the law should social workers know. Many students thought, I want to be a social worker, not a lawyer, so why is this lady trying to teach me some legislation? Well, legislation affects us all as human beings. It affects you as employees as well as employers. It gives you a legal framework with regards to what you can do performing your job as a social worker. It tells you what are your rights and obligations as a social worker. The obligations are quite explicit, that you have to maintain confidentiality, etc. But some of your objectives might not be obvious at the first sight. The obligations can be part of the purpose of the legislation. They can be in the initial opening parts of a law. Inclusion, prevent social exclusion, take care of the best interest of a child. Sometimes Czech legislation is not enough. You need to look at international treaties, a treaty on people with disabilities. And if part of a social work is inclusion, you should know what is a right to life in a community. But when it comes down to your rights, it means that in certain situations social worker can, but doesn't have to do something. It is about when a social worker can affect the rights of another human. There are certain legal frameworks describing the conditions under which they can do it. Then it gets a bit complicated. For example, if social worker submits a proposal for a child being taken away from a family, if he or she doesn't do it at the right time, then basically it's not legal. So it is very difficult, and it's a very thin line whether you can enforce certain right or not. And sometimes social workers complain that whatever they do, it's never the right thing. Another reason why it is good to know the legislation is uncertain legal terms, such as public order, best interest of a child, right to a life in a community. It's not anything you would find in law. You find it in jurisdiction, in comments, in European human rights comments, general comments that explain these terms that we can find in UN treaties, for example. So that's another reason why to know legislation. Responsibility, perhaps being aware of responsibility of social workers for their procedure, led in abroad to opening a discussion whether social workers should have education in law or not, because social workers that work in public administration, their actions their action can be attributed to the state. We can imagine that there is a social worker working at a labor office, and or if they do something incorrectly, if we're not in the public sector, then a client that feels damaged by the work of a social worker can make a claim at a court. So that's why also it's good to know legislation. It is good also for the social worker, so that the social worker can fulfill the mission properly. And one of the principles of social work is to defend the rights of an individual or whole groups. A social worker should not be kind of a pocket lawyer, but he should be somebody who knows where to send his client, which other specialist experts they should go and see. They should know where to submit a complaint, where to make an appeal. And with these groups, social workers should be able to know how to defend against legislation issued by municipalities, because the local authority regulations can influence the rights of whole groups that are often your clients. So such social worker should know that, for example, if he assumes that a municipality doesn't have proper rights for allocation of housing, or that some acts or local regulations can be discriminatory, that they can contact the Ministry of the Interior. So also in situations where the law is not in compliance with legislation, or that it is in dispute with certain other legislation, it's again only a legislation that can help us to even this out. I would like to comment or resemble of a speech of a speaker yesterday, Dr. Janebová. She wrote about that we can see how criminal policy is going to push out the social policy, and she mentioned, amongst others, certain acts of local authorities that sanctioned actions of public harm. But we can think whatever we think about this, but rather than dealing with it on the level of social policy, it's been dealt with by repression. She mentioned regulations about that you can't sit anywhere else than on a bench in a whole city, and then they remove all the benches. So she said to be very careful about, very sensitive about such regulations, and watch out that if they are being pushed as social workers into some kind of a repressive, controlling subject, rather than actually social workers. And I would like to say that social workers can actually fight against these things. And last but not least, it's affecting legal regulations. I would like to say that the depth of legislation a social worker needs to know is dependent on what is their target group, which area, whether we speak about social worker working in a prison, in a municipality, or social worker working at the ministry. And when we speak about the ministry or the regional authority, these are the places where they can comment on bills being proposed. They can affect legislation by supporting their clients to, for example, file a complaint at the court. because the jurisdiction of the highest court is actually what forms or creates legislation. I would like to give you an overview about how law affects the life of clients, but the application of law is causing any trouble in practice and needs to be amended. So I think that social workers should be heard more during preparation of legislation. Now, there are many social workers for whom law is their daily bread, whether they are people working at the protection of children, departments, in facility for social services. They should also know the international treaties, whether it be treaty on rights of children or of people with disabilities, because these treaties contain the elementary pillars of rights of people with disabilities, and it is social workers who should protect the rights of these clients, rights of people with disabilities. I am very happy that there is a project coming up, and in many courts there is a position of forensic social worker who's going to help a judge, especially in foster care cases. He's going to help the judge to see the complexity of the situation of a human. So we can see that the social work is starting to infiltrate into legislation more and more. If we talk about the coexistence of social workers and lawyers, it's rather the social workers that seek lawyers, as they need to deal with their clients' legal issues. But I think that many lawyers do not know what social work is, so they're not aware of the contribution that social work or social worker can have for a legal profession. And now this brings me to where we can find social workers abroad. The first area is the coexistence of law and social work. If I ask you about the difference between an advocate and a social worker, or between advocacy and social work, I don't mean that the advocate has more money, higher social status, and everybody knows what an advocate does, that they have their chamber that's very successful in lobbying for their interests. They have their own law. But if we imagine a situation, an elderly gentleman comes to a lawyer's office and he's a little bit neglected and a little bit upset that he was evicted from his place, from his flat, because noise making, and he believes that it's about the landlord trying to get more money out of this place. The lawyer can perhaps think, yes, let's do it, let's get as much money out of him as possible, of the landlord. And the social worker is going to say, okay, let's go around your place where you're going to feel safer and talk about it. This difference can be that if such person only is in the hands of a lawyer, it's going to take several years. His situation in the house is going to be uneasy for the gentleman as well as for his neighbors. If a social worker is involved, it can happen that he realizes that the gentleman lost his wife. He was very active with his wife, but last year she died, and now he doesn't do anything. He doesn't go out. He's a little bit deaf, so he has his telly out loud. There is no lift in the house, and he doesn't find it easy to go upstairs, so sometimes he leaves rubbish bags in the building. The social worker can propose solutions such as hearing aids, or maybe to find that he can find a friend in the residential block, and it can result in him not spending all day just in front of the television, but finding other fulfillment in life. They can find some carers, etc. So in abroad, lawyers work in cooperation with social workers. Although social worker, well, option one is where a social worker is an employee of a lawyer's office. And other option is where a social worker and a lawyer are one person, because many universities in the United States now offer a study specifically of social law. Because social workers see the complexity of a person living in certain community. It can contribute that such person would resolve the entire situation thanks to the social worker, and is not going to lead to him seeing a lawyer in a few years later with very much the same issue again and again and again. So the objective of a lawyer is to get a case and try to win a case of a client, to enforce the client's interest. The objectives of social work are social justice. A lawyer is also defending interests of a client. He doesn't ask. A social worker, on the other hand, sees a client in the context of the whole situation, offers him possibilities, warns him about certain risks and obstacles he might need to overcome. He warns what his limits are. What social workers and lawyers do when they work together, and especially if they are this two-in-one, is confidentiality. Because both lawyers as well as social workers have different rules with regards to when do they have to report things to the police, etc. So even abroad, they have not yet managed to resolve this collision, and I don't think that anybody even strives to do that here. So far, I don't know that such close cooperation between advocates and social workers exists anywhere. I also realize about another area where social workers work. There is a social worker and human resources, so that's working in a corporates. In the USA, a student tried to do research how many workers work in the corporate sphere in these areas. Why did they choose these jobs? How they can affect the major corporates in the area of socially responsible company. She addressed big companies, different universities, faculties, and at the end she found only for social workers that fulfilled the requirements of being educated social workers by education, working in corporates and having experience in one of these areas. Other finding was that these social workers were not accepted because of having a diploma, university degree in social work, but because of their capabilities. Social workers are able to communicate the topic of diversity, non-discrimination. They are very good at interpersonal relationships. They know how to negotiate. They can lead people. These are all skills that are very beneficial in the area of human resources. With regards to social responsibility, what's highlighted or emphasized is common elements in the values of social work and values and principles of social responsibility. Again, it's not about social worker being hired for being social worker, but for sharing the values of a company that wants to be social responsibility. And such a company can use social workers' competencies because each company have their different social responsibility policies, whether it be cooperation with NGO, community, financial donations. And the social worker, thanks to the knowledge of the community, of the environment, connection to the NGO, they are able to direct the efforts of a company to behave correctly when they want to be social responsible. Now, the time is out, so I would like to say goodbye to you. And I would like to follow up to Professor Levická. In the past year, we had the social work and social worker as many times as we did in the previous entire decade. So I would just like that the knowledge about what social workers do and social work is does not go away. And I hope that what a great profession social work is, that we keep increasing the awareness of it, the profile of it. So thank you very much for your attention.
Děkuji za váš příspěvek.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Zdražilová, for your paper. I also apologize for pronouncing your name incorrectly. And now I would like to ask you, you have shared so many information with us in your paper, including the creative opening, which is really appreciated also by comments. It was very original. I'm quite sure that you managed to trigger a lot of ideas, because that's exactly what we need. It's excellent. I just wondered what to do in case once the workers in the field need to get some legal advice. For instance, when a social worker may push certain institution on behalf of the client, because the client may be entitled to get something. For instance, the institution refused to do so, thinking that the client is not informed, and so on. So what do you advise students in such situations? We have also a question like that. Well, it is related to what I have already said. Social workers should not act as a lawyer, and social workers should respect limits of the profession, but they should know what type of protection is offered to the clients, whether they can appeal, whether they can complain. For instance, discrimination in the employment, to complain at the district labor inspectorate, or just knowing that there is an ombudsman which may just check the procedures, approach of all offices and institutions. So social workers should know what instruments of protections is available, and know where to refer the client. And it is not that good, because I'm quite aware of that legal help is not well established in the Czech Republic, so it's not that easy. But I'm quite sure that those methods how to protect clients exist. Thank you very much. That was exactly what I wanted to know. Social workers should not work as so-called pocket lawyers, so they should know whom to contact in given situation. Then I just wrote down the local degrees. I know it also from my own cities. It is really not good. And then you have also already mentioned that roles of social workers sometimes may be overlapping, because social workers somewhere may have chance to influence different degrees or regulations and so on. Do you have experience like that by pushing from the side of social workers certain degrees, local degrees, were either cancelled or at least discussed? Well, I'm quite sure that it may sound strange, because nowadays more than ever I understand that if social workers should communicate with somebody who doesn't share values of social work, trying to push the person to change the view about certain groups of clients, it's difficult. But if I remember it right, social workers in the social legal protection of children managed somewhere at Olomouc district. In fact, the city wanted to announce free of charge additional payments for the entire city, because according to their opinion, the entire territory was so-called no-go zone, dangerous. But it requires courage, because of course social workers sometimes are not heard, but of course sometimes you manage. Thank you very much. So a lot of success in your work. I greet your organization.